Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm Rich Holfeld, and I'd like to welcome you to the Saturday morning meeting with County Assessor Fritz Cady. Like many of you, my home's assessed value rose 52%, and my tax bill increased 39%. Mr. Cady, I'm not happy either. In looking at the tax bill breakdown, the greatest portion is funding schools. Our schools have risen to over 70% of the tax bill. It should be noted that the village portion remains at approximately 10%. The Illinois Constitution states that the state should fund 50% of education, but it currently funds only 23%. Causing the burden of funding schools on to our real estate tax bills. Today, this presentation is threefold. First, why isn't education funded at the state mandated level to give us relief on our real estate tax bills? To that end, I've invited state officials, Governor Pritzker, who did not respond to the invitation, State Senator Napoleon Harris, who did respond, but is out of town, and State Representative Thaddeus Jones, who was unable to attend, leaving State Representative Will Davis, who is here and will shed some light on state funding for education. Secondly, Mr. Cady is here to briefly explain the how and the why of our assessments and taxes being calculated, particularly here in the South Suburbs. And remember, Mr. Cady, as Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. And lastly, Mr. Cady, while we're all here, what can we do to lower our tax bill? Also invited today were 2 county commissioners, Donna Miller and Monica Gordon. I don't see either of them in the audience. We'll start with Representative Davis, briefly, the state funding for education, then Mr. Cady. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here this morning to offer my commentary about how school and school funding plays into this broader continuum as it relates to property taxes. Before I begin, again, I am Will Davis. I'm a state representative of the 30th District, which represents the village of Homewood and several communities out here in the Southland. And I was just sharing with the mayor that the last time that I was in this auditorium was when I was in 7th grade and I was trying out for the Homewood-Flossmoor fry basketball team. Believe it or not, I got cut because they said I would be too tall. But that notwithstanding, one of the roles that I play in Springfield, I think, is one of the most valuable roles as well. In addition to just being a legislator, I chair what I think is one of the most important committees that exist in Springfield. And actually, relevant to this conversation, I am the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee for Elementary and Secondary Education, school funding, if you will. And I've had the pleasure of serving in that capacity for several years now. So let me begin in 2017, not a long walk, but 2017, we actually instituted a new school funding formula called EBF, Evidence-Based Funding for Elementary and Secondary Education, in which we took evidence to determine exactly how we would approach a new formula and to put resources into a formula that we felt would go toward the best ways to educate our students. So this is not a conversation about the quality of the education that you receive here in your Homewood and Flossmoor school districts, but exactly what we did to try to fulfill the mandate that the mayor talked about relative to the state's portion of school funding and what that really means. So yes, we put together a new formula that takes evidence into consideration about exactly how we funnel dollars into school districts. This is a statewide formula. The one thing that I may disagree with the mayor on is that there was a time where we probably were at about 23% funding from the state perspective, but as a result of the new school funding formula, Mayor, we've increased a little bit. I think we're pushing about 40%. Not necessarily where we need to be, but I say that to say is that the formula is working because we are putting more money into it. Now, when we talk about resources, your tax dollars are resources. State funding is resources to school districts. And since 2017, when we started under then Governor Brown and moved into Governor Pritzker, over the years, each year, except for 1 year during COVID, we have added $300 million new dollars to school funding, or a total of about $2.5 billion new dollars into school funding. So, in order to reach that mandate, we have to put in money. There's no doubt. We have to do our part and put in resources. And we have been doing so every year. Now, do we need to do more? Absolutely. This past budget year, I recommended that we add an additional $100 million into the school funding formula, but unfortunately, the governor didn't agree, and we only landed at $350 million. Now, I mentioned 300, but let me explain the additional $50 million, which I think is really important to this conversation today. When we built the new school funding formula, we put in something called the property tax relief grant. And what the property tax relief grant is supposed to do, it's supposed to offer a 90% grant to school districts that are some of the least underfunded school districts in the state of Illinois to try to help them to build their capacity. But also, one of the pieces of that is that they are then supposed to abate of their grant that they would get. They're supposed to abate 90% of that. They're supposed to abate up to 90% of that grant, or a smaller portion of the grant. They get 90%. But they are supposed to abate dollars back to the school district. In other words, they're not supposed to levy the amount up to 90% of the grant that they receive. And just two examples out here. Homewood-153 didn't qualify for the grant. Homewood-Flossmoor School District 233 did. And as a result, they are supposed to abate $1.9 million from their levy. And in return, they got a grant from the state of $1.867. So again, they're supposed to not charge you, and we're trying to backfill most of that amount, 90% of that amount, to that school district, which is supposed to, in turn, if they're not levying it, it's supposed to offer some relief to property taxes. Flossmoor 161, their abated amount was $2.069 million, and their grant that they received is $1.94. Now that grant that each of those school districts receive becomes a part of what we call the district's base funding minimum. When we put money in, the idea is to continue to build upon it. So as we add resources, every school district's base funding minimum, the BFM is the amount of dollars calculated through our formula that each district should receive to provide a quality education for its students. It does take into consideration additional weights for things like minority students, as well as ESL students, as well as special education students, which adds just a little bit more of a percentage of dollars to them based on the numbers that exist within their districts. So based on the district's base funding minimum, that is the minimum amount of resources that they should receive in order to provide a quality education. So every year that a school district accepts that grant, it gets baked into their base funding minimum. It doesn't go backwards, it continues to move forward. And the overall school formula is supposed to move forward, which means that every year we put new dollars in, that raises the base funding minimum for that district. And that's where it stays. That becomes a new floor of funding for that district. And every year we add more, that floor raises a little bit. Right now, there's no school district that is below 60% of adequacy relative to the amount of money that they need. The idea is to get every district at least to 90% of adequacy. That additional 10% are the resources that we get from the federal government. So we don't have any control over that. Our objective is to get all school districts to at least 90% of adequacy relative to the amount of money that they receive from the state. And it's a continual process. We don't have $3.5 billion to just drop into the school funding formula right now. That's why we've been adding it incrementally every year. I have been talking to the State Board of Education as well as the Governor's Office about the need to increase that amount beyond $350 million every year. That's the only way that we're ever going to get to full funding. Right now, the governor and I don't see eye to eye on that. He's comfortable with increasing by $350 million new dollars. Again, 50 of that goes into the property tax relief grant, 300 of it goes into the formula. He's comfortable with that. I am not comfortable with that. I have been encouraging him, as well as the state board, that we have to do more if we're ever going to achieve what we consider to be full funding for our school districts. We have to up that amount. Statistically, it should be in the neighborhood of about $550 million or $500 million into the grant. That will at least put us on a good trajectory to try to get to or achieve full funding for schools, or at least the 90% funding for schools within the next 5 to 7 years. We started out in 2017, and we're going to keep doing it every year until we get there. But we do need to increase the amount overall to make sure that we are trying to achieve at least our objective and our responsibility to all of you as Illinois residents and Illinois taxpayers, so that the elementary school portion of your tax bill starts to go down. Because again, we are acknowledging where we're trying to go, and then subsequently, as we continue to add, school districts have to then acknowledge that they don't need as much of your tax dollars in order to help with schools. They're getting it from the state. That is our objective, and that's the trajectory there that we're on. Now, relative to the real reason why you're all here, of course, you'll hear from the assessor about his calculations and the work that he does that ultimately results in your assessment, and why some of those assessments have increased significantly. He'll speak to that. But again, as far as school funding is concerned, and the schools portion of your tax bill, the state of Illinois is working hard to try to reduce the amount that your local school districts are asking from you, and we're trying to do it. They're not necessarily asking it, they're demanding it. And we are working hard to increase that amount. When we settle the budget every year, we're trying to figure out how much we're going to put in pensions, how much we're going to put in Medicaid, and schools is one of those pieces, but it's an arbitrary piece. What I mean by that is that pensions and Medicaid are what we call above the line expenses. So we're going to pay that no matter what. School funding, be it a below the line expense or a discretionary expense, which means that that dollar amount can fluctuate. We've been on a good trajectory to put the $350 million into the formula every year. We also know that we need to increase that amount. And I am trying to introduce bills, I am trying to talk to the state board, the governor's office, to agree that in order to achieve what we consider to be full funding of schools here in the state of Illinois, we have to do better than the $300 million that we were putting in. But there's always the question, what does the state need? So I'm hoping that I've given you some perspective on what the state is doing. But if anybody has ever called my office or knows me, you know that I'm willing to come talk. I will bring resources, I'll bring people if I need to, or you're welcome to come to my office and let's sit and have this conversation. I also brought with me that I'm not going to go into detail with. If anybody wants to know how the property tax relief grant works, the calculations that are involved, here's a document that lays that out. I can email that if anybody wants to have it. I'm more than happy to share that document. But again, I just wanted to, at the very least, let you know that our school funding formula is indeed working. It really is working. We are trying to live up to the state's obligation for school funding here in the state of Illinois, and as long as we continue to put those dollars in, we'll get there. At $300 million, we're on a longer trajectory to get there. That's why we've been advocating for an increase of upwards of $500 million to put into the formula so that we can work to achieve where we need to be relative to school funding. So, with that being said, I'll send maybe your questions on the end. But again, I'm not going anywhere. If anybody wants to talk after, share email addresses. I got a few cards with me. Again, feel free to come by my office, an appointment. Tawny, some of you already know Tawny. I'm more than happy to sit and continue to have this dialogue with you. Sure. Well, my office number, if anybody wants it, is area code 708-799-7300. And the young lady I mentioned, Tawny Smith, is my district director and my scheduler. So I go where she tells me to go, and I meet who she tells me to go. Her email address is T as in Tom, A as in Apple, W as in Wanda, N as in Nancy, Y as in yellow, S SMITH, and that's all one word, Tony Smith, one word, at SBC Global, which is one word, .net. And if anybody doesn't know, my office is literally right up the street at 174th and Dixie Highway, in the same building as the East Hazelcrest Village Hall. And I just want you to know how important this conversation is to me, because my daughter is a student, and a student at James Hart Middle School here in Homewood-Flossmoor. So thank you all very much for your time.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in here on a beautiful Saturday morning in the summer. And I first of all want to thank you for your citizenship in being here in this town hall. This is not my first Saturday morning in Homewood. I've not been a stranger to Mayor Hofeld's Saturday morning office hours. We've done many of these over the years, haven't we, Mr. Mayor? But this is a town hall, it's a bigger deal than office hours. And as I was chatting with Mayor Hofeld, he said to me, Fritz, people are angry. People want solutions. And I want you to know that I feel not only anger, but a sense of indignation at the bills that are sent out, but not only that, at a sense, with the sense that this system is, the property tax system is unsustainable, that it's unjust. This is why I do this. I want you to know that I'm not happy. I don't even like property taxes. That's why I signed up to change the system. And what I wanted to tell you today is that, and this is going to be a big topic of the town hall, we are going to get to things we can do practically this morning to provide relief to at least some of you in the room. We'll talk about that, but also an important part of this town hall, which is an exercise in citizenship, is how do we change it? And what is required is a combination of your citizenship, your energy, that sense of indignation that we all feel, with heroes and leaders in leading the change. Okay, I wanted to salute you. You heard from Will Davis here. I want you to know that he is one of the heroes and leaders in a pretty lonely fight down in Springfield to make this system better. We look over here down in the south suburbs over in Indiana, and we see how much lower their property tax bills are. And everyone very legitimately and fairly asks, why are their property taxes so much lower than here? And I know it might have been hard to follow some of the ins and outs of what Will Davis was saying, but if there's one reason, it's exactly what Representative Davis is talking about. And that's that in our state, we have historically been last in the nation in providing support for our school districts, in covering the cost of funding for education from the state. In Indiana, they do double what we do here in Illinois. That is improving because of the lonely work that Representative Davis has been leading on. We need more leaders and heroes in this fight. We have other leaders and heroes in this room. I wanted to recognize Commissioner Donna Miller, who is here. Donna, you want to raise your hand? She's a representative on the Cook County Board, and she too is one of these leaders and heroes in this fight. I have worked with her on legislation that is there trying to build the property tax base here in the south suburbs, working on incentives for grocery stores, for pharmacies, for other kinds of incentives to build our commercial industrial base so they can help provide some sharing of the burden that is falling so heavy on homeowners like you. And we've done so much other work on trying to get better data so that big clouded property owners can't whittle away their share of the burden down to nothing. And we'll talk today, it's very disappointing that through the appeals process of the board review that they deemed commercial and industrial property in Homewood less valuable today than it was in 2020. And that's why their tax bills are going down while your bills are going up. And that is a state of affairs that's not only unsustainable, but again, we feel a sense of indignation and unfairness. We'll get to that. You have the handouts that we gave you. But first of all, let me just tell you about how my office fits into this system. Then we'll look at your tax bills and practically see what we can do today, more immediately, to resolve issues. Then we'll talk a little bit more about how we can harness our energy systemically to change the system. So my job as the assessor is, a lot of people think that I determine everyone's taxes, which I don't. We don't, in the assessor's office, we don't determine any levies. We're not trying to set assessments so that your taxing bodies collect a certain amount of money from a certain group of people. That is not what we do. We don't set the rates. So our assessments, no matter where they are, rates would be higher because here in the south suburbs, we don't have the same amount of property values that other communities have, and in order to provide the same amount of education here that other places get, the rate ends up being naturally higher. And it's not a product of how we're coming up with the assessments that result in that higher rate. So we don't determine that, but what our job is to do is to fairly estimate the value of everyone's property and to make sure that everyone's getting their exemptions. And so that's what we can talk about today. Madam, we'll have time for Q&A. The rate is not set by any one person. The rate is a product of two things. It's a product of how much your schools and local governments and the county governments have determined that they need to fund themselves. That's called a levy. Sometimes we use this word levy, and not everyone understands what it means. Think of it as like the dinner bill, okay? And then that's in the numerator, and the denominator is everyone's assessed value added together in the community. And assessments really, what they do is they determine each person's share of that dinner bill that's been determined by those taxing bodies. And the rate results. So the rate actually fell this year because everyone's assessed value is up. Does that make everyone happy? Absolutely not. But so it's a mechanical output of how much your taxing bodies are raising divided by everyone's assessed value. But the key thing that we can do here, and that we want to own as an assessor's office, is have we estimated the value of your property correctly? Okay? So that's one of the things that when we sent out assessments last year, you had a chance to appeal it at our office and also at the board review. And this year too, you'll also have that opportunity to appeal it. It will affect your tax bill next year. But what can we do now? What I'd like you to do is to take out your tax bill, if you have it with you, and to go and look at the bottom left-hand corner of it, the area where it lists exemptions. Now, if you look to your left or to your right, probably 1 out of 3 of you does not have your homeowner's exemption. 1/3 of people in Cook County don't have their homeowner's exemption. If you don't have your homeowner's exemption, we have some good news for you, because your homeowner's exemption is worth about as much as the typical homeowner's bill went up this year in Homewood. Okay? So this is not going to be the truth for everyone here, but it is something that we can help with if you don't have your exemption. And so if you see zeros in the area for exemptions, there's no amount listed for your homeowner's exemption. And if you're a senior over 65, and there's zeros there for your senior exemption, And if your household income is under $65,000 and you're a senior, and there are zeros there, we can work on getting you enrolled for the senior freeze, which will freeze your assessment at the time when you first became eligible. So if you have those zeros on your tax bill, I'd like you, around exemptions, I'd like you to raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand raised because a member of my team will come around he will take a picture of your bill, and we'll make sure that we can get you issued by the treasurer a corrected bill that includes the exemption and that your bill will be lowered. These are the bills that are sent to you by the treasurer, but the one thing where we can change your bill immediately is where if you don't have your exemptions, we can get a corrected bill printed for you that includes the exemption and will result in a lower amount. So keep those hands raised. Jose on my team is coming around, and also Helen Harris on my team who heads outreach will also be doing this too. So let me explain a little bit more about the exemptions. So the exemption is one of the progressive things that we have in a regressive system. Property taxes are totally regressive. Property taxes have to be paid whether you're employed or not, no matter what your wealth is, no matter how well you've been doing, no matter whether you're a caregiver or not. It's a regressive system. But exemptions provide savings automatically off of your bill. So we want to make sure everyone's getting it. If you have loved ones who are not in the room, you should go and check their addresses, their exemptions too, and you can make sure that they get their exemptions. It's a really good way to be a good citizen and helpful to your friends. The senior freeze is the most valuable exemption you can get. It's for seniors to keep them in place and prevent them from being priced out of their community. And it's, if your household income is under $65,000, and if you're over age 65, your assessment's frozen in place, and you would not be feeling any of the backdrop of the rising assessed values happening across really Cook County. The last 3 years have seen pretty big residential price increases, the biggest residential price increases we've seen in the last 15 years, or just over the last 3 years. But for seniors, we get your freeze that keeps you locked in place. So that's what we can do today on that. What I'd like you also to do is when you look at your property tax bill, if you look at the estimate of market value, I'd like you to look at that. It's also on the bottom left, all the way on the left to the bottom. Think about how much you think you could get for your house today if you were to sell it, and compare it with what we estimate it to be worth. I want you to know that we, as a team, we all walked humbly, and we know that you are the world's biggest expert on your own home. You know more about it than we do. And there may be important things about your home that we don't know. And that is, if you find that we have estimated the value of your house to be higher than what it can sell for in the market, that is a fine evidence and a fine basis to make an appeal. Not every appeal is going to result in a reduction. It's only the cases where we've overestimated the value of your property, or we've overassessed you relative to someone else who has a similar kind of property in a similar location. But we want to walk humbly. So what are the kinds of things that we might not know that could cause our assessment to be off? If you haven't renovated your home in decades, the kitchen hasn't been renovated, if other parts of the interior haven't been renovated, those are the kinds of things that you can talk about in the narrative section of your appeal to tell us about that, because we probably don't know that. And if we know that, we can then compare your home to below average homes rather than average homes in determining your assessment. So that is really important things for us to know in an appeal. Currently, so there are 4 different townships here in Homewood, and I know we have some folks here who aren't from Homewood. We have some folks from Flossmoor and Glenwood. I see you guys too. You're all in different townships. All of the townships will be open for appeal in a couple of months in the fall, okay? And that is when you can file an appeal at our office. And then once you file an appeal, once we send out assessments, you'll have 35 days from the time of opening the window, 35 business days from the time of opening the window for appeals to make your appeal. We will then be processing it for a couple of months after that. We'll make a decision, send it out to you, and then you have another opportunity to appeal at another county office, which is the Cook County Board of Review, and you have an opportunity to appeal there as well. And then that will affect your tax bill next year. On exemptions, I want to make one other note. If you're missing your exemption this year, you probably had exemptions that we missed in past years too. And you are entitled to a refund of the property taxes that you overpaid in previous years, up to 4 years, if you did not have exemptions in those years. So that's true not only of the homeowner's exemption, but also of the senior homestead exemption and the senior freeze. So you can and these are called certificates of error. If you miss those exemptions, you can get refunds for each of those years by going to our website, applying for certificates of error, and that will provide additional relief off of your tax bills. So we've talked about exemptions. We've talked about appeals. I wanted to talk about, and again, in the spirit of the town hall, what we can do to make this property tax system work better for all of us. What I want you to know is that at the assessor's office, we're only the first part of a 2-step process in determining everyone's share of the burden. Assessments determine your share of the burden. So the first step is us when we send out assessments and consider your appeals. In the south suburbs last year, actually homeowners' share of the burden slightly fell by the assessments that we did. It fell by 1 percentage point because yes, residential values were up, but we also saw the commercial industrial properties were up in value too. All the trucks that we see driving around, all the industrial that's growing, the casinos, the hotels, all the different revival and commercial activity that we've seen in the last 3 years, we saw that too. And that resulted in homeowners' share of the burden of the assessments that we completed for our part slightly falling across the south suburbs. What fills me with a sense of indignation is that the second part of the process, this is the Cook County Board Review part of the process, massive reductions are made on commercial and industrial properties, down $1 billion, resulting in, for example, in Calumet City, and you guys go to that Home Depot in Calumet City, their tax bill is down $370,000. Whereas in Cal City, the typical homeowner's bill is up over $1,000. Home Depot's doing pretty great. It's been doing pretty great since the pandemic hit. It's things like that that fill me with a sense of indignation. Because commercial properties were cut at the board review level by 18% in the south suburbs this year. Residential was only cut by 1%. In Homewood, commercial industrial properties had their values reduced at the board review level by more than $50 million. Homeowners assessed values by a little bit more than $1 million. That creates a massive distortion in our system that results in people's bills being higher than they should. And that is one of the things that fills me with indignation. And that is why I've been working with people like Will Davis on working on state legislation that will get us better data so that these big commercial industrial properties can't whittle down their properties like this and not pay their fair share. So I've been working for years with representatives. Hey, everyone will get a chance to talk. This is the town hall. Everyone is going to get a chance to talk and to comment. I just want to present to you, like you invited me to come in, to give you my perspective, to give you some ideas, and then we can talk and comment, and we'll have all of our questions. I don't know if it'll be answered, but at least hope will be handled. We'll address them. So this is an important thing that we need to fix in the system, that homeowners and commercial industrial properties, you all share this dinner bill that has to be paid, that provides the things that we need. We love our schools here. And, I grew up in Chicago. I would come to HF for our debate tournaments when I was in high school, and I saw what a wonderful school we have. And HF is just an example of some of the wonderful resources that we have here. But homeowners and commercial industrial properties all share in paying for this. And it's not fair when we see commercial industrial bills in Homewood, they're going to be down $6 million this year. And homeowners are picking that up. And that is not fair. And that's basically because at another part of the government that I don't control, they're making big reductions that are disproportionate. And that is one reason why I feel this sense of indignation. Now, what can we do? What can we do about this burden shift together so that we can get solutions that are bigger than just addressing exemptions and appeals? I know that's inadequate, okay? Appeals and exemptions are the tools that we have available in our office immediately, but we need to work with people like heroes like Will Davis to provide systemic solutions, heroes like Donna Miller to get systemic solutions. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that we can work on together. And this is what's mentioned in the handout that we gave you. First of all, education funding is the most important thing to turning the dial on levies. Levies affect homeowners and commercial industrial properties equally. They are this dinner bill that has to be paid. What can we do to reduce the property tax dinner bill? Education funding. That is what Representative Davis is talking about. That's what drives the bus. Education funding, it's about 2/3 of your property tax bill. Okay, you can probably see that on your bills if you look at it. So all of us working together, telling folks in Springfield that you've set up a system that's unfair to us in the south suburbs, you need to be providing more support for our school districts, just like they do next door in Indiana, to reflect our values. That's one. Also, we've also worked with Representative Davis, who's the chief sponsor of the bill, to get us better data on commercial industrial properties, so they can't whittle down their properties to nothing at our expense as homeowners. We came closer than we ever have to getting this bill passed this year. We have a roll call that we got from the speakers showing that it can pass out of the House. All the previous opponents, we got onto neutral. This has been hard work that we've done together with Representative Davis and the delegation. Your voices in Springfield can really make a difference in getting it a vote. We've been working on years for getting a vote for it. Your voices can help Representative Davis in his desire to fight for you. Okay. Third, and this is, if there's one thing that you can call your representatives in Springfield to work on, is something that we call a circuit breaker. What is a circuit breaker? A circuit breaker is property tax relief for the folks who need it most. And it's really the best way to provide property tax relief that doesn't hurt other people. We have a circuit breaker mechanism in place in the state right now. It's just not funded. They have decided in Springfield, and again, a present company excluded, because I know where Representative Davis here is on this issue. They need to make it a priority that we all feel this sense of indignation about property tax bills being so unsustainable that we can't build our wealth, that we can't afford it, that people are going to lose their homes. This needs to be important enough in Springfield to fund the circuit breaker. We can also make the circuit breaker be more targeted and impactful for the people who need it most by changing it so that there's a means test, just like with the senior freeze, so that there's a certain income level where that relief is most focused. We could do the same thing in Springfield with the circuit breaker. We're going to be calling on this to be passed this year. And we think this is the best way, the fairest way to provide relief on property taxes. The circuit breaker, you can read more about it in the handout that we gave you. There are other things that we can do. We can expand participation and modernize the long-term homeowners exemption. Only 1% of homeowners qualify for this exemption now. I didn't even talk about it in my presentation because all it does is disappoint people. Because there's some things, it's like, okay, your income has to be under $100,000. That's true for most of us. You have to have been in your home for more than 10 years. Okay, that includes a lot of people. And then there's a convoluted formula that sets up that excludes 99% of potential beneficiaries from it. We are working with legislators to modernize and expand this exemption in a way that won't hurt people in the south suburbs. Reforming exemptions is hard because it has impacts on communities in the south suburbs that have low tax bases, so we always have to be careful about it. It's not an automatic thing, so it requires hard work to do it. Also TIFs, the tax increment financing districts. We have heard from communities that say, why can't we use TIFs to provide relief for homeowners? TIFs have provided all this pot of money for commercial industrial property owners. Why can't we use it to provide relief for homeowners too? I've been in conversations with people in communities in Chicago that are suffering from gentrification, communities like Pilsen, and they generated this idea that came from the bottom up. I think it's a good idea. So we're going to seek amendments in Springfield to TIF legislation so that TIFs can be used to provide relief for homeowners too, just as they've provided aid for commercial and industrial property owners. Lastly, we've worked on other ways to expand the tax base here in the south suburbs. Expanding the tax base is important because the more people that we have participating around the table to share paying for that dinner bill, the less part of the dinner bill comes to you. You probably have been left in a situation where you end up covering more of the dinner bill than you took in for dinner. That's what's happening now. And we've got past the Southland Reactivation Act, working with the Southland mayors and managers, that basically allows properties that have fallen off the tax rolls, that are not paying any property taxes now, to encourage new reactivation of them by phasing in their assessments over time. We got this passed in 2022. We encourage villages like Homewood, and Glenwood, and Flossmoor. It applies to many communities in the Southland to also participate in that. So those are the solutions for reform that we're fighting for. I'm sure you have other ideas. The last thing I just wanted to address quickly, because I've been with many groups like you in the last couple of weeks. We have some frequently asked questions, so I just want to address them now. And then I'm sure you'll have more and we'll get to your questions. First one is, why are Black and brown communities being more affected by higher property taxes? And really, this is a function of the systemic inequity of how the whole system has been set up to begin with. When our state is underfunding schools, that means local communities have to make up the difference to fund the schools that they need. And if they don't have any property tax base to begin with, or their property tax base is lower, or their homes sell for lower values than they would sell up north, that leads to automatically higher rates to begin with. And the communities that have higher rates are really vulnerable to all these different kinds of tricks that people can use to get their assessments cut if they're big commercial industrial property owners. They're more sensitive to those cuts. So I mentioned the disproportionate cuts on commercial industrial properties in board review. That affects Black and brown communities the most because their property tax bases start out low and they're more sensitive to those cuts. If you cut commercial industrial values by 18% and cut residential only 1%, that affects the communities that have little base to start with the most, and those are Black and brown communities. Another question is, why can't the county postpone bills due on August 1st? At the assessor's office, we don't send out the bills or collect them. The treasurer's office does that, and you can ask them that. But the key thing to know is that your property taxes pay for your schools and your fire and your police. Those, they have costs and they need to be paid. You do have options that the treasurer mentions on the bill that they send out for payment. And you can direct those questions to the treasurer's office. Far be it for me to tell Treasurer Pappas how to do her job. Why can't the county impose assessment caps? I was just talking with Mayor Hofeld about this before we started. Under the state's property tax code, what we have to do at the assessor's office is estimate the value of every property in line with the market. We can't put caps on ourselves because everyone shares in that dinner bill. If we're arbitrarily capping some people at the expense of others, we violate the law. So we're a creation of that property tax code. That's our job. And this assessment system got in big trouble in the past when people who had clout and had power artificially kept some people's assessments way below market while others were not. And so we're determined to make sure the system's fair to everyone for our part. And that's why we want to follow the transactions that happen in your community to estimate the value of the house. That does not mean that we're always correct. We walk humbly. If we know that you know more about your house than we do, if you show us that my house is not worth this, I've been trying to sell it for 10% less than what you assessed me at, and I haven't been able to sell it, we'll recognize that. That's great evidence. But that's also why we can't impose assessment caps, because it affects others. If we cap your assessment, that means someone else has to make up the difference instead. And that's an arbitrary use of what we're supposed to be doing, which is be fair to everyone. Can the county keep properties off the tax sale this year? This is, again, the treasurer's office oversees the tax sale process. I know that they've actually been holding off on it because there are some court cases on that. Again, you can direct that to the treasurer's office. So you guys have been really patient and good. I know you've got lots of questions. We do have a little bit of time there, Hofeld, for that. Okay, so who has the microphones? And let's just make sure that everyone gets their question asked. Please try to keep your questions concise. You can also make comments so that everyone has a chance.
Get some questions asked, and please not be redundant. I'll work out my way back.
Well, I just want to get on my soapbox very briefly. I live in Homewood, Thornton Township. My taxes have gone up 104%. I appealed in late summer after the reassessment. I appealed again in the fall. I got a little bit of relief, but again, my taxes have doubled. I think these outrageous taxes are actually eroding property values.
That's very true.
Thinking of selling and getting out of town. But whenever my house on the market, people are going to notice, any savvy buyer is going to know that my taxes were $100 a week, and now they're $200 a week. And I have a friend, his taxes only went up $300 for the year. Oh, okay, well, at any rate, these taxes, by putting these taxes in, we're saying buyer beware, and that is a bad sales pitch.
If I could just comment briefly and then we'll get to the next question. I agree. High property taxes lower the value of your homes. 100%. High tax rates have been an enduring problem in the South Suburbs for why we don't get the same value for our home that homes in other communities do that have lower rates. The good news is that over the last 3 years, people have been paying more for homes than they got 3 years ago. And for those of us who stuck out those years when housing prices were going down, there has been more wealth created in the last 3 years than ever before. But the system is again, I feel a sense of indignation because it's hard to build wealth when the taxes keep going up. What can we do in our office immediately about that? One, sir, let's make sure we get an assessment rate on your house. Two, let's make sure you're getting all your exemptions. And three, let's work on these focus in on other parts of the system that can be made better so that you're not bearing so much of that demo. Okay? Okay.
Very briefly, Margaret here from Flossmoor. Friends, you mentioned a couple of times Indiana, and we've all heard it. Move to Indiana, taxes are lower. They're lower for two big reasons. Number one, they have consolidated school districts. They don't have primary school districts and high school districts. They have one school district with one school superintendent, one school board, and much less overhead. So while we've talked a great deal about improving and increasing the funding, we need to talk about reducing the spending. That's the other big part The second thing that Indiana did about 20 years ago, because I lived there, they had a referendum statewide cap, and it passed, to cap residential assessments at 1% of market value. 1% of market value. And all of those taxing districts, they have the same kind of levies, they have the same districts, they have library, they have park districts, they have to live within that budget. And until we start putting that pressure on our local taxing districts, we will never get relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Someone to consider Representative Davis until you have it passed.
And just building on what Margaret said, this is an example of solving the problems that we're feeling. There are many different things we can do. The common element in solving them is your citizenship. Your citizenship, the kind of citizenship that we have in this room, if you're doing great questions, that kind of attention and pressure will get the attention and pressure of the people who are setting school budgets, the people who consolidate school districts, even get legislation passed, like Representative Davis has been working on, the people who set appropriations in Springfield and make it up a priority. Your citizenship is going to power all those changes.
Hello, I'm Ron Schmidt. I've been a citizen of Homewood since 1955. I have a question for you, Fritz, and a question for Mr. Davis. First, my taxes went up, my exemptions went down. They didn't explain that. And secondly, I understand a bill was recently passed in our legislature that allowed the school districts, which comprise 73% of my tax bill, to increase their taxes without a referendum. Seems like taxation without representation to me. So, those two questions.
Sure, let me do the second question first, and then we'll do the first question. With respect to referenda and the powers of your taxing bodies to raise levies, I think it's important for citizens to have more power in deciding, how their money is being spent. Their property tax monies are being spent and being determined. Your citizenship is really key in doing that. And, when we have school board elections, it kind of, my wife's a teacher, so I believe a lot in education. But I feel in school board elections, everyone pays attention to curriculum, to masking rules, to book bans and stuff. No one ever asks about money. Do you guys know the value of the dollar? If all of you could, if we all, when we're voting for people who are trustees in school districts, ask, tell me how you know the value of the dollar. What are you doing to get the best use out of our money? That is an important thing. Your first question was, why did the value of my exemption go down? There are a couple different answers there. It's not any nefarious thing. What it is that when tax rates fall, as they have, so tax rates fell in most communities in the south suburbs because assessed values overall are rising. When rates fall, that tends to reduce the stated value of your exemption. Okay, the base is growing, your exemption has less of an impact on the total assessed value that you have after the reduction for your exemption. The second part is a little bit more nefarious. It's a result of the state multiplier. When commercial and industrial properties are cut so much by the board review, that increases the state multiplier. The state multiplier is there saying, the state is saying, we think properties in your community are worth this, but one part of the system keeps on lowering those values, so the state says we're going to increase the multiplier. So that also, the higher multiplier reduces the value of your exemptions.
Mayor, before you move on, sir, can we? I don't know very many legislators.
Representative, you can come and use the mic here.
She's telling me I was too close to the speaker, so I just want to talk to you after. I can't see us passing a bill that allows it without a referendum. Did something special for the Homewood School District this past year, but it was based on a referendum that allowed them to additional sources. So please, let's talk afterwards. And I'd like to know which bill you're referring to if you know the number.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I've been a resident of Homewood for about 30 years. So you talked about these, the dinner that we're all sharing, bill. When people get exemptions, is that just wiped clean, or is that somehow then have to be made up by the taxpayer base?
So this is a good question. So the question was, so if people are getting exemptions, does that reduce the size of the base? Actually, exemptions do reduce the size of the base. And that's why our legislature can't increase exemptions to the moon. I think every legislator, if it didn't have bad consequences, would like to increase homeowners exemptions and senior exemptions at the threshold and the senior freeze. The issue is that the more exemptions that we have, the lower the base is overall, and the more it's shifted onto others. So what we can do, the basic problem, why am I talking here about exemptions then? Because some people are getting them and others aren't. And if 1/3 of our homeowners don't have homeowners exemptions, I want to make sure that they're getting the maximum benefit that they have. That would shift some burden onto commercial industrial properties. Really, when their bills are going down, I think that's okay. But we have to be careful about exemptions because it affects others. When the state increased the senior exemption in 2017, it had pretty negative consequences in the south suburbs. Our neighbors in Park Forest, 10% of the people fell off the tax rolls when that happened, so that those people were happy. The other 90% of Park Foresters had their bills go up 15% because of that change. So exemptions are something we have to be careful of. That's why we call for the circuit breaker rather than changing exemptions is the best way to make the system more fair, because then the circuit breaker requires funding from the states, but it's also directed to the people who need it most in terms of relief and incomes.
I'm also a resident.
He'll come around and make sure we get to everyone's question.
I'm also a resident of Homewood for over 3 years, and I did hear last week, Channel 7 reported that the county had made over 4,000 errors in these assessments. Is there any truth to that? And it also reported that the errors would be corrected before August 1st. So is there any truth to that at all?
But both are true. That there were about 4,000 properties where we saw the land rates were too high, but we got the vast majority of them corrected before bills were sent out. And that's an example of making sure that we have multiple layers of checks. If something seems to be going wrong, we want to make sure that it's corrected before bills go out. So that's an example of us trying to make sure that assessments are accurate, and when they happen, we'll fix them. There are a couple hundred of properties that haven't been corrected because the board review has not approved the corrections yet. The board review has to approve the corrections, and then every single one of those will be corrected. It affected properties that have lots of excess land. And we noticed the issue, and so we got it corrected before people had to pay their bills.
So what are you saying? I mean, are they going to notify these additional people that are corrected?
But so what I'm saying is that we saw an issue, we corrected it before people got their bills, so their bills were corrected. For the couple hundred people where the board review hasn't approved it yet, those people we will notify.
Report it that way on Channel 7.
I know it might come as a shock. Sometimes reporters might not get everything, and they get a story and they want to talk about it. But you know, for us, we consider that an example of us trying to, if we're finding something wrong, we'll correct it.
I just want to say one other thing, because on my property, I have a home that is identical to one of my neighbors, the same house. Now, that property is paying $2,000 a year, but mine, I'm going to pay $10,000 after the assessment. So that one, I cannot figure out, and I know this property has 3 exemptions,
Okay.
whereas I only have 2.
Okay.
So
what we're going to do is we'll have one of my members of my staff come over and take a picture of your bill, and we can get to the bottom of that. But there can be a legitimate reason why that's true. The person who has the lower bill, they might, ma'am, and we'll get to everyone, but the reason why that can be true is someone might have a senior freeze. So if they're a senior whose income is under $65,000, their freeze might have been put in place years ago. We also have an exemption for disabled veterans. Our state created an exemption to people who paid the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, I've talked to people who lost limbs in wars, and our state recognizes their sacrifice by substantially reducing their bill if they're a disabled veteran.
All right, so I have 2 thoughts and questions that I wanted to understand. So I'm confused why Homewood has 3 townships, why the villages are so small, so then we're paying multiple village managers, multiple public works. Why can that not all be consolidated in order to help lower those property tax bills? I for one am in Thornton Township, and I feel like I am paying for private jet rides. And so we have a lot of issues. When is that money going to be refunded? My next question also is, you keep talking about the businesses and those buildings having tax breaks. I will say, as a small business owner, the rents, especially in Cook County, on small business properties are extraordinarily not sustainable. Some of these properties are wanting to charge $5,000 a month for 1,500 square feet. No one can pay that. So you're saying the Home Depot, yes, they can pay a higher rate, but there has to be separation between Home Depot and Walmart versus small businesses.
Okay, great question. Let's get to both of them. And then Mayor Hochfeld, we do have some questions up here, so we want to make sure that everyone gets their hand seen. Okay, great. We're going to get to everyone here today. You guys have been so patient. So the first question was, what's the deal with all these different townships and units of government, and doesn't that negatively impact me? You said there are 3 townships in Homewood. I think there are actually 4. You're one of the few villages that has 4 different townships: Raymond, Rich, Bloom, and Thornton. Boy, does that make it hard to be a good citizen to follow all of these different things, right? I live in Oak Park. We have 16 different taxing districts, including something called the West Mosquito Abatement District.
Mr. J.B., I have a question over here.
Oh wait, I'm just trying to answer her question. I'll get to it. I'll try not to be too long. So we do need more consolidation of government. We have more units of government in Illinois than any other state, and I think we have 50% more units of government than any other state. That kind of fragmentation puts a high burden and expectation on citizenship, which might be impossible. So more consolidation would help us all to pay attention more and focus more on bigger decisions. So your citizenship can help to drive consolidation, because sometimes one of the things against the consolidation is, well, I don't want to have my school district merged with that other school district. And so our citizenship needs to power that kind of thing for the reasons that you mentioned. The second thing we talked about businesses and small business in this. Small business is so vital. It's a driver of job creation, but we all share this tax burden together. And I think people feel a great sense of unfairness when they see commercial tax bills going down $6 million in Homewood, while homeowners' bills are going up $10 million. That is not. People feel that is not fair. That we're all working with this levy burden together, and we all need to share it together. And I think a lot of people think that there's just no way commercial industrial property is worth less now than it was 3 years ago during the pandemic. It's just not credible. So yes, we have the next question.
So I have a quick question. I'm a Homewood resident, and Mr. Davis spoke about some type of grant where District 153 didn't qualify for the funding, but the other school districts did. Can you clarify or elaborate on why District 153 did not qualify?
Representative Davis.
In the interest of, I don't know if I can, there's a very long computation that determines which districts. So of the money that we have, there are about 33 districts that are receiving the grant, but there are many others who didn't receive the grant because we ultimately just ran out of money. So 153 didn't qualify. I don't believe it's on my list to qualify, but we should have it more detailed, and I can show you my PowerPoint presentation that talks about how you ultimately get to the districts that receive the grant versus those that don't. But your Homewood-Flossmoor school, the high school district, does receive the grant, so it should be also impacting your taxes as well.
Mr. Fritz, question for you. You mentioned your counterparts over at the Board of Review quite a bit. My question is, how was the Board of Review able to be so effective in reducing the taxing base of the commercial properties and industrial properties versus the assessor's office? It seems like you can't burden, yet they're relief. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So the answer to your question is that they're the last word. So we're at the assessor's office. At the assessor's office, we're the first draft of the assessments. So as I mentioned, in the assessments that we sent out overall in the south suburbs, homeowners' share of the burden actually slightly fell. So people's share of the levy would have actually slightly fallen by our rights. But because the board review is the last stage, they can take an appraisal from someone that assumes last year's full tax rate, which is much higher than this year's lower tax rate. They can just artificially assume that and grant a reduction. The board review takes the opinion that some value of apartment buildings is not real estate, that is personal, so then they can slice the value off of apartments. They do this on data centers. And it's very concerning. And I'll let them explain themselves for why they do that. But what I can state, because I have to certify their numbers, is that it results in a big shift of the burden. We had 4 percentage points of the burden overall in the south suburbs shifted onto homeowners from commercial properties because of reductions like that. And that's why it's so devastating.
Yes, hi, I was wondering, since I grew up in Homewood, and over the years I see that there's a lot more like rental homes and rental properties, and since there were way back, and do the investment property people, do they pay the same tax rate as homeowners? Because what my thought concern has been for years is that if you do not have children in the school systems, are the people that live in our area that are only renting, they're not paying any taxes for their children to go to school, but is the rate the same for the people that own those rental properties?
This is a great question. There is a national trend, and there's a trend across Cook County for more and more of these private investors, these are private equity funds or publicly traded real estate investment trusts buying up homes, single-family homes, and then renting them out. I think the number of these homes has doubled over the last 5 years. It's somewhere between 3 to 5% of single-family homes in Cook County now. And we see this happening especially in the south suburbs. It's partly a symptom of we're not building enough new housing and we're not building enough new rental housing. And so because there's that demand and not enough new housing is being built, not enough affordable rental housing is being built, then these funds opportunistically come in and rent them out. Now, your question was, what are we doing to make sure that do they pay a higher rate? First of all, what we do in our office is we make sure we have, the first thing that we do is we have a sales validation team that looks at, are all these sales actually representative of what average people can pay for a home? So we're going to exclude any transactions that are artificially high, so that they're not part of the mix and they don't affect your assessment if they seem artificially high. So that's one. Two, we can go, I met with 75 mayors in the west and south suburbs last year, one-on-one, and one of the topics that we covered is, I said, I'm seeing more of these homes being bought up by investors and funds, and we want to make sure that they're not claiming exemptions, because that would lead to them having the same rate as you. They are not entitled to those exemptions, and so I've worked with mayors on how do we find these situations where these investors are still claiming them. So we get in the weeds. We say, hey, you guys control the water billing. If you're seeing on the water bills limited liability companies being the addressees, that is a really good sign that it's an investor, and we want to match that against the list of exemptions. And I know some mayors are very aggressive in making sure that people are not inappropriately claiming exemptions in their villages, and we try to do that. We do have a constitutional issue with this. We can't assess like properties in different ways at our office under the Constitution. We have a constitutional duty, even though we might be annoyed by outside investors buying these, they are entitled to the same assessment as similar homes, no matter who owns them. You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I happen to notice two things. 65 years of age, $65,000 of household income. Is there a relationship between the number 65? But there's another question that I really need to understand. It relates to income. How do you define income? And as you get older, income goes down. You have retirement, you have Social Security. That's why I don't get why it's so hard to get the senior freeze exemption. As you get older, you don't work. So why do we have this 65 number? $65,000 of household income is not a lot of income. So could you work that with me?
Sure. So the income amount is set in Springfield by the General Assembly. It was $55,000 in 2017. It was raised to $65,000. So there's nothing magical about the 65 number. But the thing that we have to remember is that, so we're all sharing that dinner bill together. I'm answering your question. I think it'll help. Just bear with me. If we raised it to 75,000, that would mean that more seniors would be eligible for the freeze. But it does mean that more of the dinner bill would have to be paid by everyone else who's above the threshold as a senior or was not yet 65. And that's a tough trade-off for our leaders in Springfield to make. And it's especially tough in the south suburbs because our tax bases are lower in our communities. And so just like cuts in industrial and commercial properties can lead to more radical shifts in the burden, so too can changes to the senior freeze or other exemptions. It can result in bigger shifts in the south suburbs. I mentioned that example from Park Forest, and that's not the only community that was affected by those shifts. So this is why we think the instrument of a circuit breaker is a better way to provide relief, because it doesn't affect others. It requires funding from the state, but it doesn't have negative implications for other taxpayers. I'm not saying that the senior freeze might not require another look. Our tax bases are all bigger in the south suburbs now because of the rising values for residential properties, and rates have come down. But I'm just saying that is why it's a tough question for our representatives in Springfield to weigh. Okay, so we can go get to the next question. Ma'am, you've been very patient. I'm gonna take your question right here.
My taxes were $365 54 years. I planned to live in that house till I died. These taxes have forced me out. I have to move. I can't pay over $8,500 a year for taxes. I'm building it as 106 years old. It's a frame farmhouse with non-tuned wiring, and you're charging they rated assessed at $270,000. It's been for sale for 7 months. I've had 3 offers. 2 of them have backed out when they saw the tax bill. The third one was willing to buy it with the tax bill. However, when they went to their lender, the lender refigured their base and said they can't pay that house because there's $800 a month tax bill. Now, my real estate agent told me that other lenders are doing the same thing, so they got rid of the high increases in the south suburbs. So my house is not worth $270,000. I can't sell it.
So, ma'am, thank you for your story. This is a great reason why we want to listen to you. In an appeal, we can look and say, you've been trying to sell your house for probably less than $270,000. $279,000, and 3 people have not been able to buy it at that level. So that is a great piece of evidence for us to look at in an appeal to get the assessment down. Also, you mentioned that you've been there for a long time. That is an old house, and you know a lot more about your house than we do. I don't know, I grew up in a house when the kitchen dated back to the Truman administration, and it affected the value of the house. And maybe the interior of your house might also make it below average in terms of dollars per square foot of other homes. So that's the kind of thing that we'll look at. So we're going to take a picture of your bill. We'll also see if you might qualify for other exemptions that you might not have had. Okay? Thank you for your testimony.
Okay. Good morning. I'm probably at the wrong meeting. I have a property tax situation, and I learned today that I probably should go over and see Representative Will Davis about it. Who's involved with it. But I do have a concern, which I think the mayor can address, and that is the rental of properties in my neighborhood. I don't necessarily approve of that. I have no way of authorizing people to rent their homes out. I don't know until the property becomes somewhat unkept. Then I can make an assumption. But I think the village of Homewood need to do a much better job along those lines of ensuring that we actually discourage rental properties in our neighborhoods. And my last property tax issue is I was out of power for 3 days here in Homewood. And those 3 days, I realized the importance of ComEd. And I hope that our mayor will give them hell for 3 days that I had to do it.
Well, let me tell you, I was sitting next to the mayor before we started speaking. He was telling me about the tornado damage in the community, and I bet that was the tornado damage, wasn't it, Mayor?
We have one tornado, and I'm sorry, but I think ComEd, and they brought in their other crews from outside of the state. Our Public Works Department, along with other Public Works departments here, did a magnificent job.
I just wanted to mention one more thing about rentals. If you're seeing properties that are being rented out, you can go and check and see if an exemption is still being claimed on them, and then you can go to our whistleblower site so that they can be fined for claiming exemption when the property is being rented out. So if you go to CookCountyAssessor.com, that is our site, and you can look for the whistleblower link there.
Hi, my name is Maggie Goslin. I'm over here.
Okay, hey Maggie.
I actually own 2 properties, one in Homewood and one in Glenwood. I own the one in Glenwood because my ex-husband can't get a loan to buy that property from me because of the tax rate, similar to the other person. But my question is, last year we filed an appeal on both properties. He got the appeal granted for the house in Glenwood, and we got a refund. But then this year, even though his tax or assessed value was too high last year, this year his assessed value went up by like $50,000. And I don't understand how 1 year it's determined to be assessed too high, and then the very next year, not only is it not what it was the year before, but it actually went up that much.
So thanks for your question. First of all, Jose and my team will get your addresses so we can see what happened there. We haven't reassessed the south suburbs since last year. So we have been, basically every 3 years we take a snapshot of where we think the market is. So the last 3 years have been a very strong residential market. Residential values have risen, from 2020 to 2022, which is when we cut off the measurement. They rose a lot. They rose a lot for the previous 15 years. But that said, we can walk humbly and make sure that we're taking account of all the information that we need to know. You can put forth any information, and I don't know if that appeal was made in our office or that the board reviewed. We are, basically we do this with the data that we have at our stage, and we will take all the information you got to get to the right number. It's based off of market. It's based on assessed value is based on your market value. So we're looking at transactions that happen in your community. We estimate a market value, and then assessed value is 10% of that. Plus, you get to reduce, you apply your exemptions to reduce that value.
Hi, I'm Alex Callan, I'm a Homewood resident as well. So, you said, and from what I can tell, right, all our appraised values go up as the market goes up. But if the average value goes up, we're all going up about the same percent. So our shared burden should be relatively the same, except for these corporate industries that are coming in here, they're getting their rates lower. And you say that it's the review board that is doing this, and you have to approve their numbers. So first, why are you approving their numbers? And second, who do we vote out at the review board who is allowing them to get low ball values?
To answer your question, I have to approve the numbers that they set for that cycle. It's under state law, it's called a ministerial duty. So the values that they set, I basically have to approve, otherwise no tax bills go out at all. And I don't have that discretion not to approve their numbers. However, what we can do is if we see egregious problems, we can reassess properties the following year. It's an extraordinary step, but we can do that, and we are looking at what we can do this year on assessments for commercial properties, which were excessively reduced. The board review is a 3-person elected body of government, and you can see who your representatives are and when elections are happening. And I think it's good to ask them questions.
I have a question. Hi. Over here. Hi. Okay, Mackenzie from South Suburban Housing Center, also a Homewood resident, born and raised here, have rented here, now own a home here, and we talked before. But my question is, if we knew that the South Suburbs were inequitably assessed and the properties values down for so long, and then we're going to have this drastic increase, because I know that there's a lot of things on the bill, but at the end of the day, the biggest variable between 2022 tax bill and 2023 is the assessed value. So my question is, why couldn't there be like an affirmative plan to increase it over 3 years, the values, up until the next triennial? And before I asked you this, you said that it was against the law. What law are you talking about? That's my question.
Can everyone hear me? So under the state property tax code, we have to reassess every community at minimum every 3 years. I have had it as a goal of my team, of my office, to get to the capacity where we could reassess the whole county every year. There are other parts of the United States, like New York and Maricopa County in Arizona, that are similar size to us, that do that. And it would allow for more gradual changes in assessments. We simply don't have the capacity, given the amount of appeals that we get every year, to do that right now. We get about 300,000 appeals a year, which is, I think, number 2 or 3 in the United States. We used to be number 1. We used to get 500,000 appeals a year. We need to pay attention to those appeals, to listen to the cases, just like some folks have brought forth here today, to give them fair treatment before we talk about having assessments be redone every year. So that is the short answer to your question. So what happens every 3 years when we do this? We take a new snapshot of where the market is. The market changed so much from January 1st, 2020, before the pandemic, to January 1st, 2023, which was the measurement period in the reassessment. And in that period, as of January 1st, 2020, we were at the end of a period where housing values had fallen in the South Suburbs for a decade, since the housing crisis in 2007, 2008. They'd gone down for years. The pandemic hit, and then we had 3 strong years of revival. On the one hand, this has created more wealth in this community from housing than had been created in the previous decade. That's the plus. The minus is it led to higher assessments. What I wish, and so I'm not going to tell you that your tax bills wouldn't have increased because of that. They would have, and they did. But they rose too much because this other body of government is saying that commercial values didn't increase over the last 3 years, and actually they fell. And that's why you need to pay more share of the burden. That's where I feel my sense of indignation with all of this.
Military veteran. Sorry, I live on Maplewood, not far from the casino. So I've heard that it's gonna benefit us somehow, and I'm trying to figure out tax-wise, how it's gonna benefit us, and is it gonna be a good thing for me, or the people in my community, or what's the deal with that? Thank you.
Thank you. So
I'm a Homewood resident.
thank you, ma'am, for your question. And Mayor Hofeld, I'd like to take the lead on these. I can add anything that too.
There's no benefits on the real estate end from the casino. What you'll find is it goes into a general fund, and that will be funding fire, police, and operations. And we're not talking about a lot of money. No, ma'am, not.
And if I could just add on to what Mayor Hofeld said, I believe the casino is being built inside a TIF in East Hazel Press. Okay, both towns. So it's inside a TIF. So it's not going to directly increase the property tax base at all. It may help to create some indirect benefits, reducing costs or attracting other businesses. But because it's in the TIF, and that is not expanding the tax base in your community, this is one of the reasons why people in communities are saying that why don't we amend the state law so that the funds that are going into TIFs can also be used to provide tax relief for homeowners in communities? And we think that's worth exploring.
Mr. Kagi, I'd like to disagree with you. A TIF is one of the few instruments that a municipality such as Homewood, being a non-Homewood community, has. They've been very successful. We administer them very carefully, and they're terrific for development. The money generated within those TIFs goes for development within the community. Not a burden, whatsoever.
Mayor Hofeld, I think we can both be saying the same things and not be inconsistent with each other. I agree, TIFs are an important tool that villages have to stimulate investments in their communities. But I also agree with people in communities who think that the resources within a TIF, if communities decide it's worth it, can also provide relief for homeowners if they decide to. So I don't think we're inconsistent. So we can go to the next question.
Over here, sir. To your left. To your left.
Sorry, it's a big room here.
In the tax relief stuff, okay, we have kids in the school district. So I go to the board meetings, and it's told the casino, the schools are not getting any funding from the casino. They have their dispensary. That's going to help our community, we're told, and everything. But we're not seeing any relief. You know, they're told in our board meetings, the families are told, I urge all of you, if you don't have kids, to go to those board meetings, and they are in two street. They're saying to talk with, that they've talked to our mayor, that the school is not getting any of that funding. So then the burden is on us. The burden is on community members that don't have children in the school district. But what is going to be done to relieve it? We did referendums, they passed referendums, but the thing is, like you said, they didn't qualify for the grant, right? But as community, if we keep paying these taxes, that's $7 million, the state is not going to fund anything. But what's going to happen to our property taxes? You're pushing everyone out.
So I feel the same indignation that you do. I don't like property taxes. A lot of people think if you're the assessor, you must like property taxes. I disagree. I think property taxes are a regressive way to fund our schools. I think they are too high. I think they affect communities in the south suburbs disproportionately. People in these communities, in black and brown communities, they have more of their wealth invested in real estate than other groups do. And yet, they have to absorb more of this tax through a higher rate on their wealth than other communities do. And that is why what Representative Davis is doing is so important, because how do we change that? We need to change how we absorb the cost of educating our children. And too much of it falls on people who are investing in this community through buying homes and running businesses. And too much of the burden is put on them through that way, and not enough burden is covered by our state which has the ability to tax incomes, which has the ability to tax people who are getting dividends from stocks and from private equity and from high-paying salaries. The state has the ability to tax those kinds of incomes, and our communities don't. And they can use that ability to help pay for our schools, just like they do in Indiana. In Indiana, they fund more of their schools through income taxes, and that's why the property taxes are lower. And we could do the same thing, but what I move back to again, how do we solve this? The indispensable element is your citizenship. You being here, asking questions like that, tough questions of me, but other stakeholders, and then also working with people like Representative Davis, who are heroes in trying to change this, who need your allyship to move the needle in Springfield. So the question was about the dispensary. I don't know about like the mechanics of the dispensary here, but what it does illustrate is that things like casinos, dispensaries, other sources of income like internet sales, all these things are ways of generating revenues for our schools, for our taxing bodies, and someone is deciding what those revenues are being used for. And what I'm saying is your citizenship can be used to say, hey, the revenues from this, I want to cover things that my property tax bills are so high. That's where your citizenship is a critical element. So I want to make sure we get to everyone's question. We got a couple more people here.
I got a question real quick. I don't know if this question has been asked, but we've heard a lot of questions being asked. And those questions are for things in the future. What is being done for us who have a tax bill due this season? Those whose mortgages are going up this season. What is being done for us when we're being taxed out of our homes? A lot of us, when my wife saw the tax bill, the first thing she said, just like the gentleman said earlier, we're going to have to sell this house. What's going to happen when we have to pay these bills and we don't have the money to do it?
So your question is one that hundreds of thousands of people and your neighbors are asking. Let's focus on the practicalities right here. The most immediate practical thing that can be done is to first check the exemptions. Because if you don't have your exemption, okay, I know you're shaking your head there. Some people are in a position where they don't have their exemption. So that's the most practical thing that can be done immediately. If you don't have your exemptions, again, look on the lower left-hand part of your bill. If there are zeros by your homeowner's exemption, by your senior exemption, that is something that can be addressed in a matter of days by having a new bill reissued with those exemptions. Second of all, if you are missing exemptions in the past, you're entitled to a certificate of error for the amount of property taxes that were overpaid. So Jose and my team, he can come by to you, he can take a picture of your property tax bill, make sure that if you're missing any exemptions, we can get that corrected. That's the first line of defense. Second line of defense is let's check your assessment to see is it accurate or not. And if it seems like it's not, you will be able to appeal when we open for appeals. That will only affect your tax bill next year, but the best time to address this is in the near future so that we can get that corrected if that has been wrong. Third of all, the treasurer, I suggest you look at your bill because the treasurer presents a variety of options on how to pay the bill, when to pay the bill. You will not lose your home if you don't pay your bill on August 1st. There are several different options in the treasurer list there. I don't run the process that she talks about there, but that's what can be done most immediately. And I know it must sound frustrating to hear systemic discussion of systemic issues here, but we've got to get to them. And the best time to address those issues was yesterday. The second best time is now. So working to solve these issues in the future is important because exemptions and appeals are not enough. Exemptions and appeals are not enough to solve this problem. And getting to the harder, more systemic issues is the way that we can make this better in the long term. I wish I had a magic wand to solve that immediately in a democracy. Unfortunately, we all need to harness our energies together to make it a priority for people in the state to change these things. And I'm an ally of you and everyone in the community who feels this indignation and wants it changed. And that's a great topic for our town hall. If you have other ideas that have surfaced, we've had other meetings like this, and that surfaced in some of the recommendations I talked about today, and I want to hear them too.
So before we move forward, I just wanted to let people know we're going to take a couple more questions, but Assessor Kagan will still be in the building to answer and meet with people one-on-one. So just a couple more questions.
Everyone who's been so patient, thank you, and I will stick around for anyone who doesn't have questions answered.
Thank you. On July 3rd, I discovered that in 2023, my property taxes tripled. This raises three questions. First, in early 2023, I purchased a modest condo at a price comparable to similar units in the area and moved to Homewood. Several months later, I received an assessment claiming the market value of the condo is 17% above the price I really paid. For this reason, I question how you determine the adequacy and accuracy of your assessments, even acknowledging the challenges posed by condos. Second, I thought I had a good case for appeal. However, as a first-time homebuyer, I knew nothing about how to go about appealing, in particular what specific kinds of information would be relevant, and it was hard to find out how to find out until suddenly the window for appeals closed. Seeing all these disparities and reductions, I question your portion in the equitability of the appeals process. Third, I fully understand that eroding tax base always seems to burden residents who have to shoulder an ever-increasing proportion of the tax burden. And that's what we're seeing when we see the Village of Homewood residents are now estimated to own 75% of the total assessed value of their property rather than 67%, an 8 percentage point hike over 3 years. But none of this is an act of nature. So I question why there is no ongoing process of mutual coordination between all the relevant stakeholders and the assessment office, so residents are not restricted to reacting to a fait accompli. Because we know how property owners react to jack-in-the-box price hikes, tax hikes. You've heard it here today, and the long-term consequences are not good. So unless we have an army of young professionals ready to gentrify the South Suburban properties now destined to be abandoned, a never-shrinking tax base will have to carry all the burden until things collapse, and that's a death spiral.
Thank you for your comments and all your questions. He owns a condo, and condos are basically, we assess the whole building, the whole condo building, and each condo owner's share in ownership of the building is their share of that assessed value. The party that appeals for the condo building is the condo association. So if you live in a condo, first of all, make sure that your association is representing you and taking advantage of the appeals process to make sure that the value of the whole building is fair. So this is hard for anyone who's ever lived in a condo. Condo associations are the whole variety of the human condition and the human race. Some condo associations have a professional manager that's on top of it. Some of them are just run by volunteers. Make sure that whoever is running your condo association is on top of it, availing themselves of the appeals process. We see lots of condo associations paying too much to work the appeals process. You do not need to hire a lawyer to make an appeal. Actually, people who appeal on their own were slightly more successful last year than people who hired lawyers or representation, because it's really an issue of data. We want to make sure that condo owners are not paying too much to get their assessment be fair. So make sure that your condo association is taking advantage of the opportunity to appeal directly, and it's reducing, not paying too much if they are hiring a lawyer. Shop around. I fully agree with the taxpayer on the other issues of property taxes being too high. I don't disagree.
Hi, thank you for sticking around to answer these questions. One thing that just struck me on the two answers ago
don't worry, if you don't have your tax bill paid by August 1st, you won't lose your house. Well, frankly, that's exactly what my level income of people, family, senior citizens, we were raised and taught when you get the tax bill, net 30, even though we're not getting it until sometimes the second week in July. And then other years, we've pushed it forward by months, and it's this cat and mouse game back and forth of when's the money due. That's not a good way to run it. That is something, I'm not even questioning the rates or how much we have to pay. I'm questioning how your office is implementing it and getting this out, the information. Maybe that all needs to be recalled. Make it quarterly. February and August, all summer people are stressing about it. At least people in my income level are stressing about this, and my neighbors. Then you come springtime, we get hit in February. Right after that is income tax time. Right after that, it's right after the holidays, right before income tax time. Is there some other conversation being had about even a prepay? I'm not in favor of that, but something where you slowly over the course of the year, some alert so that we're not getting hit with this, like he said, jack in the box effect. But even just on a regular year, let's say it didn't increase, they're not dependable. Before COVID, it wasn't dependable. You'd sit there and wait, when's it gonna come? When's it gonna come? It's 2024. The computer systems are all linked, and yet I went on repeatedly, week after week, and the information changed. It wasn't accurate. Sometimes it would show that there was an exemption being appealed, going through different things, and then the next week, 0, 0, 0. And then a week later, it would be totally different. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on in your office. A lot of times with the election cycle, it's blamed on, oh, it's a new administration, it's new people, give us a little time to get it all straightened out. You're dealing with people's emotions, future plans, your kids going back to college. This is huge. This is the difference between a kid maybe having transportation to go back or change their school decisions based on $1,000, $2,000. It's huge in our $60,000 to $100,000 range. So that's your office specifically. I'm wondering, have you even talked about changing the way it's implemented, the bills getting out to us?
You raise very good points there, but actually, I was referring to the treasurer's office. We don't collect or send out bills at the assessor's office. As I mentioned at the start, our job is to estimate the value of properties and to apply people's exemptions. We don't send out the bills, we don't collect the bills. When I said about, when I was talking about the bills, I was just describing what the treasurer that sends out. The treasurer is the one that collects the bills and sends them out, and then describes all the different options that you have. I live in a home where in the last year we have 4 teenagers in our house. My wife's a teacher. I fully understand when you're talking about the seasonal difficulties of all of this. And there are discussions in Springfield about changing legislation that can we pay taxes monthly or at a different frequency than others. The treasurer leads that discussion. I encourage you to direct your questions to her, because I can't speak for her. She's a whole other separately elected office.
Hi.
Your office gets them the assessment information?
Yes, and we send the assessment information to them, and then the board review also does their appeals. So that's another part of the process. This process is very intricate to give you due process, we only apply exemptions at the very end of it all. So we're going to take the next question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Matt Jessica. I grew up in Homewood since 1979. I went to all the schools here. I'm raising my kid. He's going into 8th grade, James Hartman chair. So my question is this. My home assessment went up over 100%. And this second property tax bill that I got, I owe almost $10,000. My tax bill increased to 86%. My question to you is, how do you reassess the properties? Is it by data? Do you go out and check it? The reason I ask is, for myself and the audience, also in my situation, I know I had a permanent hold on my property in late November 2011, and I happen to see that, like on the improvement roads of that permit, It shows like the group we called 134 garage, carports and barns, and the permit descriptions for construction of the back, but the permit holdings for construction of a pergola. So
construction of a what?
Of a pergola.
Pergola.
Yeah, it's like an outside thing where you got posts and you got joists and whatever, you know. But you know, another thing I guess I want to ask you is, I mean, aren't the reassessments that happen every 3 years supposed to be designed so you safeguard people from getting astronomical increases in their taxes?
Thank you for your question. So the first question was, how do we estimate the value of everyone's home? Where does this all come from? What we do is we look at transactions that happened on homes like yours, nearby you, in the last few years. So I checked in Homewood, and there were several hundred transactions that took place in 22. There were several hundred transactions that took place in 21, several hundred that took place in 2020. And we try to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. So if you have a wood frame house with a certain size, we want to be comparing it to transactions for other homes nearby you that were the similar kind of construction. Now, where can we go wrong in that? We might have an incorrect description of your property. Maybe you have a wood frame house, but we thought it was stone masonry. So that's one of the bases for an appeal. You can check the data that we have about your house, and it sounds like you checked the permits that we got, and make sure that we have the right information on your house so that the assessment is accurate. Ultimately, the assessed value the estimated market value that's on your property tax bill, check it against what you think you could resell your home for. If it's higher than what you think you could resell your home for, that is an excellent basis for an appeal. But how do we come up with the numbers? It's on the basis of transactions for homes like yours, nearby you, in the last few years. And basically about 3% of homes in your community will sell every year. So basically over a 3-year period, it's about 10% of the homes that sell, and we're basically using that to price the other 90% that didn't. We make sure that we walk humbly as we do this, so that if we're getting it wrong, if we don't have complete information, you're the world's biggest expert on your house. You can present that in appeal so that we get it right. And you get multiple chances for us to get it right, because you can appeal not only in our office, we have a second avenue of appeal at the board review, third avenue of appeal at the Illinois State Property Tax Appeals Board, and in circuit court. So 4 different ways of due process to get it right.
Hi, my name is Sharon Grace. I'm a Homewood resident for 27 years. And I keep hearing you say repeatedly, south suburbs. What distinguishes us so? And you talked about black and brown. And what are we doing about what appears to be some discrimination between the black and brown, this black and brown community? What are we doing about that level of discrimination?
Sure. So the first thing, when we're talking about the south suburbs, what are some of the special issues that have impacted the property tax base in the south suburbs? We can go through all of them. Start off with deindustrialization, which has been going on for several decades. That has hurt the tax base in a lot of south suburban communities. So if you go to RV, for example, they used to have a more robust industrial tax base. All the things that have gone on in our international economy have hurt their industrial tax base. In terms of what's happened to retail, the advent of e-commerce and Amazon has really hurt a lot of our retail tax base. A lot of shopping malls are hurting. We've had all sorts of struggles with retail. The COVID hurt office properties. There's a lot of people who are working from home rather than working in offices. But then the big elephant was the housing crisis in 2007, 2008. I know lots of people in the south suburbs, including my classmates who I went to high school with at Kenwood, who bought homes down here whose values were down 60, 70%. Not in the same way. Not in the same way. So during the housing crisis, home values in the north suburbs and the north side, they fell a little bit, but people in the south suburbs were uniquely impacted by the housing crisis. Predatory financing, during the housing crisis, before the housing crisis, when we had a housing boom in the early 2000s, there were a lot of loans that were given that it was very easy to borrow money. There were a lot of predatory loans that happened, taking advantage of people, and then they got caught underwater. We know so many people who lost their homes in the 2010s. So many people lost their homes to foreclosure, and even if people didn't lose homes to foreclosure, they were underwater on their mortgages for a long time, not able to renovate their home or take care of it. And this is part of a larger systemic inequity, right? This is largely we all know about redlining, inequitable access to federal mortgage financing, regulation of banks. All of this disproportionately affected Black and brown communities. And then there was a lot of evidence that homes for people at the bottom end of the price spectrum, especially Black and brown people, were over-assessed relative to higher-end homes for a long period of time. Plus, commercial properties were under-assessed for a long period of time. Every single one of those things disproportionately hurt Black homeowners. So this is what we're talking about. And we have worked hard to address the biases that can be built into models to make sure that we're not over-assessing communities on the residential side. And we've done a lot to make sure that when we get more information, that we're making sure that there's access to make sure that we're getting better data so that we're not being over-assessed. This is why we're working with Will Davis to get better data, so that the data that we have does not have its own bias. If we're missing data on big commercial properties, that is a bias that also hurts Black homeowners, because that means commercial properties can whittle down their properties to nothing just by us not having a full spotlight on those properties. So this is why we're trying to address everything that affects these biases. But then, that's why the property tax bases are smaller than they should be. And if there are cuts being made in certain parts of the system, for example, in commercial industrial properties that are disproportionate, that disproportionately affects everyone else. So that is why, that's a big reason why these cuts in commercial industrial properties taking place in the board review have this disproportionate effect in Black and brown communities across the south suburbs. That's why they talk about it.
Good morning, Assessor Davey. I'm Rhoda, and I've lived in Homewood for 25 years. I'd like to commend you and your office with the reforms and the changes that you've made with the Cook County Assessor's function, especially comparing it to your predecessor. I also am very appreciative that you've actually shifted the appeal process to the homeowners through the development of, adopting all of these technological tools, especially your website. However, I'd like to point out, because you changed the appeal section of the database that was developed by Tiger Technologies. And I noted two things. It's not as user-friendly as it used to be. Second, the function, or the area where we're able to find the comparable properties, it makes it more difficult, or actually it's not working properly. And also the section that you mentioned where we can have actually present a narrative in the database, I don't believe that actually exists online. My second question is, I wanted to know what happened to the tax advocate function or the tax advocate department in your office.
So thank you for your question, first of all, and for your comments. In terms of the online appeals, we've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible, and every year we're adding new features to it to make it more user-friendly. In terms of presenting comps, for example, we have new functionality that we'll be adding there so that you can see the comps that we look at. Right now, when our analysts see an appeal, they will gauge your appeal against a comparability grid, we call it a comparability grid, that shows the closest comps as we see them. We're going to open that up to the public so that everyone can see that. And we agree that there are things we can do to further improve it. We're always on the lookout for better ideas. We'd be happy to take your suggestions to see what more can be done to open that up. We want it to be user-friendly. In terms of the tax advocate, we have multiple layers of outreach. We have our TPI, which is our front desk in our call center. We have a TPR, taxpayer resolution, where if you're escalating because of a difficult issue, you can also go to our office. We also have your township assessors, whichever township you're in. They're there as an advocate for you. That's something that you have that people in Chicago don't have. We were expanding our customer service staff so that we can better serve you. So we're trying to do the best we can to serve you better. We know we can always do better. We're incorporating ideas to make it better. Thank you. Okay, I think we got everyone covered. Everyone, you've been so patient. Thank you. I'm not sure it's still the...
One more!
Okay, one more.
Okay, my assessment evaluation went up almost 70%. I cannot get 70% higher money for my home. It's incongruent. So, I mean, I can understand if it went up 10, 20, 30, but I can't get that. You keep talking about what would your house sell for. It's not going to sell for 60% higher. So it's unfair. What are you doing to correct that? And then some people are looking at it. They're saying, my assessment valuation went up this amount. I put my house on the market tomorrow. I'm not going to get 60, 70, 80% higher for that same home. It doesn't make any sense. How is that going to be fixed?
Thank you for your question. So whenever my team can come over and take a picture of your assessment and your bill and get the information in your home to make sure that we got it right. Like I said, if we've estimated the value for your house, which you could not get in the market, that is a very good piece of evidence for us to look at to make sure that we get it right. So we're happy to do that. We're happy to walk humbly to get it right. We make that estimate based on sales that have happened in your community over the last 3 years for homes like yours. That's where we get this number from. We're not trying to estimate it too high. It doesn't help anyone to get it too high. It makes you mad. It makes us mad. We don't want to have to spend the time to get it right, but we're happy to do it, okay? So I just want you to know that I hear you. You're not the only one in that position. And we know that even if we're doing a really great job, there are going to be more than 100,000 cases where we over-assess people, and we always want to walk humbly so that we're on the lookout for situations like that.
All right, I think this winds it down. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, particularly the questions that were asked. We're all part of Homewood. We want to learn a little bit more. I particularly would like to thank Representative Will Davis, who is available. He's right in the very front if you have additional questions. And Assessor Fritz Kagan for being here and trying to answer most of your questions as well. Thank you for everything. After all, we do it right. We're Homewood.
And if I could just close with one thing. You guys have done Homewood proud by being a great audience with great questions and showing your community spirit and citizenship and presenting your feelings, your reactions, and working with us to try to make it better. So thank you. I thank Mayor Whitfield, thank Commissioner Don Miller, and thank Representative Will Davis. Thank you.